Hello and welcome. In this video, I'm going to talk about the structure of an academic research paper from the title to the appendix. If writing your academic research paper, you need to start with the research title. The research title, as you know, should be concise and to the point, and it should include the main variables of your study. This research title is usually followed by the affiliation of the authors. Affiliations are about the author's institutional connection, and affiliations for all authors should be mentioned. For the first author, second author, if they have the same affiliation, it should be mentioned once for both authors. If they have different affiliations, all the affiliations should be mentioned for the first author, second author, and the other authors. Then that's the abstract section. Although abstract is usually written at the end of your study, when you are finished with data collection, data analysis, and when you are finished with writing all the sections of your academic research paper, at the end you write the abstract section, which is a summary of the main findings and contributions of your study. It is written after the title and affiliation of your academic research paper. Abstract usually mentions the background of the study, then the purposes of the study, the methods of data collection and analysis, the main findings, and the implication briefly, briefly and to the point. After the abstract section is the introduction. In the introduction, you set the scene, you talk about the context of your study, then you mention the gap or gaps in the literature, followed by the purposes of your study. Then you can mention the contributions of your study briefly, and you can mention the research questions, sometimes. Then it is followed by the literature review. Literature review could be divided into some sections. The first section is about the theoretical framework of your study, which backs your study. You can mention the theoretical framework and explain about that in this part. Then it is followed by the variables that you include in your study by explaining and summarizing some studies, some related studies about the variables that you include in your study. For example, mainly the independent variable. You define it, you explain about that in the educational system, in English language context. Then you summarize some related studies. After the literature review, you can include a paragraph summing up all the literature, for example. Then you talk about the gaps existing in the literature. Then you can talk about the purposes of your study, followed by the research questions. Research questions are usually written at the end of the literature review. But as I said, it could be included at the end of the introduction. Then it is the method section. After the literature review, we have the method section. Method section could be divided into different subsections. The first one could be the research design of the study. In this part, you can talk about the research design. For example, if it was a mixed methods research design, a quantitative, a qualitative research design, a quasi-experimental research design, you can mention it and explain about that. It is followed by the context and participant subsection. In this part, you can briefly talk about the context of the study. Then you can talk about the population and the sample that you selected for the data collection and analysis. The participants that took part in your study. This subsection is followed by the data collection instruments. In this part, you can present the material if you utilized in your study. You can mention the instruments that you used and you applied in your study to collect the required data. All the tests and the questionnaires that you used, for example, both for the quantitative part and for the qualitative part. If your study follows a mixed methods research design, all the data collection instruments should be mentioned and explained in this part. This subsection is followed by the procedure subsection. In the procedure part, you can talk about all the steps that you carried out to collect the required data. You can talk about the pre-tests, for example, the post-tests, and the intervention in both groups, for example, and all the activities that students did to accomplish for example, language learning tasks, and how you collected the data, for example, it depends on the study that you conduct, for example. If that's an experimental study, you can talk about the pretest, then the intervention in both groups, for example, how you carried out your study step by step, and what the students did during the class time and outside the class, step by step. Then the post-test. If you follow correlational studies, you need to mention how you distributed the instruments, how you collected the data step by step. Then the subsection is followed by the data analysis part. In the data analysis part, you can talk about what tests you used to analyze the data. If you follow a mixed methods research design, you can talk about both the quantitative and qualitative part. For the quantitative part, what tests you used to analyze the collected data. Then you can talk about the qualitative data analysis, how you analyze the qualitative parts of your data and you generated some themes and categories in your study. That is the method section, which, as I said, can include different subsections, as I said, in the method section, we have the research design, we have the context and participant, we have the data collection instruments, then procedures, and then data analysis subsection. This method section is followed by the results section. In the results section, you present the main findings of the study. You can include tables to present the findings, just findings, and you do not interpret the findings, just you present the findings, through some tables and some figures, both for the quantitative and qualitative part, if you follow a mixed methods research design. In the quantitative part, you can present the findings via some tables. For the qualitative part, you can present the generated themes via a table or via some figures. Then you can explain about the generated themes and categories after the table and after the figure. That results section is followed by the discussion section. In the discussion section, you interpret the findings of your study, and you compare the findings of your study with the previous findings. You interpret the findings of your study. You say why you came across such findings, why such findings, and you compare the findings with the previous findings of some studies, Then it is the conclusion section. In the conclusion part, you summarize the main findings of your study. Then you can talk about the implications, the practical and pedagogical implications for English language context, Then you can talk about the limitations, limitations of your study should be mentioned in this part, followed by some suggestions for further research, You can mention the limitations, then some suggestions for further research in this part. This conclusion section is followed by the reference part. In the reference part, you can present all the sources that you utilized in your study. Sometimes you can include the appendix. Appendix section includes different instruments that you used in your study. The questionnaires that you use, the interview questions that you use, the tests that you use, you can present them in this part. That's the structure of an academic research paper. Title first, then affiliation, then abstract, then introduction section, followed by the literature review, in which you include the theoretical framework of your study, an explanation of different variables, followed by the method section, which includes different subsections. Research design of this study, context and participants, data collection instruments, procedures for the intervention processes, data analysis. Then the method section is followed by the results section, in which you present the findings of your study without interpretation. Then discussion section, you present the findings, but with interpretation. You interpret the findings, why such findings, you explain about them and you compare them with previous studies, Then the conclusion section, what were the main findings, implications of your study, limitations of your study, and suggestions for further research. Then references, and then the appendices. That's how to structure your academic research paper. If you have more questions about this, you can inform me. Thank you.